The year was 1892, and the earth around Centralia, Pennsylvania, bled black coal. We lived in its shadow, breathed its dust, and died in its depths. The Locust Gap Colliery was a wound on the landscape, a sprawling mess of slag heaps and skeletal breakers, always churning, always hungry. Above ground, the air bit with the tang of coal smoke and the tireless chug of steam engines, a heartbeat of industry, but it was below, in the suffocating veins of anthracite, that the real work was done, and where the sun never found its way. Down there, the darkness in Tunnel 7 was a different kind of darkness, not the usual mine dark where your lamp cuts a yellow hole and the shapes beyond are just rock and shadow. This was a deeper thing, a quiet that swallowed the drip of water and the creak of timber. My carbide lamp had flickered, then died, sudden as a snuffed candle. I stood there, powder kegs at my feet, fumbling for my striker, the air thick and cold. That's when I heard it. Heavy boots on gravel too distinct for an echo. A metallic scrape, like a pickaxe dragging along the coal face, approaching. I got the lamp lit, the flame sputtering, then steadying. The yellow glow pushed back the black, and there he was, a man in miner's clothes walking past me, a lunch pail in one hand. Where his head should have been, there was only empty darkness above the collar. But before that, before the impossible made its way into our tunnels, there was just the mine and the men. My name is Thomas McKenna. Most called me Big Tom. 45 years old I was then, and every one of those years, or damn near, had left its mark. My shoulders were broad from years of hauling, my hands like gnarled roots from gripping picks and shovels. My face, what you could see of it beneath the perpetual smudge of coal dust, had lines etched deep by the dim light and the constant worry that lives with a miner. My job was a powder monkey handling the explosives, a task that needed steady nerves and a meticulous eye. I'd seen plenty in my time, more than my share of close calls, cave-ins, and pockets of gas that could snuff out a man's life quicker than a lamp. Death was just another part of the shift, an understood risk, a shadow that walked beside you from the moment you stepped into the cage. The colliery was a labyrinth, tunnels snaking out like veins from the main shaft, each one a gamble against the rock. The air was thick with dust, the smell of damp earth, sulfur, and stale sweat. Water seeped from the rock faces, making slick paths and chilling the air to the bone. Our carbide lamps, fixed to our hats, were the only light, casting their inadequate yellow pools that made shadows dance and twist into monstrous shapes. Every clang of a pick, every rumble of an ore cart, every groan of timber was amplified, distorted. It was a claustrophobic world, dangerous. And the line between what was real and what was whispered in the dark grew thinner with every shift. Foreman Silas Blackwood, he ran that mine with an iron will. 58 years old, his body was a testament to 4 decades underground. Shoulders permanently stooped, voice a gravelly rumble, his face a map of deep lines. Silas was a man of facts and figures, of rock mechanics and quotas. He cared for his men in his gruff way, but he dealt in the tangible. He was the kind of man who'd spit on a ghost story. Then there was Janek Kowalski, fresh off the boat from Poland. 22, his face not yet fully claimed by the coal dust, his eyes wide with a mixture of apprehension and the bright, foolish hope of the new world. He sent most of his wages back to his family, a young wife and an infant daughter whose faded photograph he carried in his pocket like a talisman. He was earnest, eager, and hadn't yet learned the true weight of the darkness that waited. Paddy Flynn, he was the loud one. A boisterous Irishman of 30, quick with a joke, quicker with a temper. He'd scoff at anything that wasn't right in front of him. A natural skeptic who used his bluster like a shield against the endless dangers. He'd seen plenty of bad luck, but he'd never seen anything he couldn't explain away with a bit of bad timber or a fault in the rock. And Daniel Schreiber, Jacob's older brother. Daniel was a quiet man, gaunt, his face a network of deep furrows. His eyes, usually downcast, held an ancient sadness. He'd been in the mine since he was a boy, and he carried the old-world superstitions like heavy stones in his pockets, a profound respect for what lay beneath the earth. He rarely spoke, but when he did, his words were laced with a somber wisdom that most of the younger men dismissed as just the ramblings of an old, broken man. It was 3 months before my encounter, in the humid August heat, that Jakob Schreiber met his end. A sudden shift in Tunnel 7, a rumble no one heard until it was too late. A cave-in. They found him hours later pinned under a mass of rock and splintered timber. The men worked with a grim determination, the kind that comes from knowing it could have been any one of them. Daniel was there, his face ashen, watching them pull his brother's body from the earth, or what was left of it. The rock had taken Jakob's head cleanly, a gruesome, impossible precision. They'd brought up a body, but not a whole man. Just a torso, limbs, and an empty space where a face should have been. It was a grim reminder of the mine's indifference, a tragedy, but one we understood. The earth gave, and the earth took. Sometimes it took more than its share. Life went on, or so we told ourselves. The coal needed to be cut, the carts filled, and I went about my job, measuring powder, setting charges, listening for the groaning of the rock, the subtle shifts that told you where the danger lay. It was early October, a Thursday, I remember, the air already holding the bite of the coming winter. I was in Tunnel 7, well past the main shaft, deep in the new seam. My shift had started at 2 in the morning, meaning I'd been down there for hours already. The only company the drip of water and the distant clang of picks from another section. My job was to prepare a new face for blasting. I'd set the charges, tamp them in, and was just turning to gather my powder kegs when my lamp sputtered. It wasn't the usual dimming, the slow fade that warned you the carbide was low. This was sudden. A gasp of light, then nothing. Absolute darkness, the kind of dark that presses in on your eyes so thick you can taste it. My breath hitched. Years of habit kicked in. Don't panic. Fumble for the striker. Get the lamp lit. The cold air felt heavier now, pressing in on my chest. I could hear my own heart hammering against my ribs. A dull drum in the silence. The dripping water, which had been a constant comfort, was gone. Swallowed by the black. Then I heard it. A sound that had no business being there. Not in that silence. Not with me alone. Heavy boots on the gravel. A steady, deliberate rhythm. Coming from further down the tunnel, deeper into the new cut. Too distinct for an echo. Too close for another miner. And then the scrape. The unmistakable sound of a pickaxe dragging along the coal face. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It was a measured sound, not hurried, not a search. Purposeful. Approaching. My fingers, thick with coal dust, fumbled with the striker. Sweat beaded on my forehead, despite the cold. The boots grew closer. The scrape grew louder. My mind raced, trying to rationalize. A new man, maybe, sent to check the charges, but no one moved like that, not in the dark, not without a lamp. And the scrape. No one dragged a pickaxe like that unless they were utterly spent or utterly indifferent. Finally, the spark. The lamp sputtered to life, a small, weak flame at first, then steadying, pushing back the black in a meager yellow cone. I raised it, my arm trembling, trying to see. And there he was, walking past me, maybe 6 feet away, his back to me. A miner dressed in the usual heavy canvas jacket, worky pants, and thick boots. He carried a lunch pail in his left hand, the metal glinting faintly in my lamplight. He moved with a slow, deliberate stride, his shoulders slightly hunched, as if weighed down by an eternal shift. My eyes traveled up his back, to his collar, And then the horror. Above the thick, stained canvas, there was nothing. No neck, no head, just empty darkness where a man's head should have been, a void. The light from my lamp ended abruptly at the collar, as if swallowed. He kept walking. The heavy boots, the rhythmic scrape of the pickaxe, held loosely in his right hand, dragging along the wet coal face, continued. He didn't acknowledge me, didn't turn, just walked past into the deeper darkness of Tunnel 7, the scrape fading, the boot falls receding until they too were swallowed by the silence. I stood there, lamp still raised, my arm locked in place. My mind refused to make sense of what my eyes had seen. A trick of the light. Mine fever. Too much bad air. But the darkness had been absolute. The lamp had died. The scrape had been real. And the empty space above the collar, that wasn't a trick. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen, minutes, maybe an hour. My breath came in ragged gasps. When my legs finally obeyed, I didn't run. I couldn't. My body felt too heavy, too cold. I stumbled rather back towards the main shaft, leaving the powder kegs, leaving everything. My lamp, now steady, seemed to mock me with its insufficient light. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting him to be there, expecting the scrape. But there was nothing. Only the echoing silence and the knowledge that I'd just seen the impossible. When I reached the lamp house, the shift was already changing. The morning crew was coming in, their faces still showing the last vestiges of sleep. Silas Blackwood was there, checking the tally board, his gravelly voice barking orders. I just stood there, leaning against the damp timber, my lamp still on, my face probably as white as the carbide itself. Silas saw me. He walked over, his brow furrowed. "McKenna, what in God's name? You look like you seen a ghost, man." "I did, Silas," I said, my voice a raw whisper. "In Tunnel 7, Jacob Schreiber. He walked right past me, but he had no head." Silas stared at me, then let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound that grated in the quiet lamp house. "No head, you say? Tom, you been hitting the whiskey early? Or maybe that gas pocket got to you. Jacob Schreiber's dead, man. Been dead for 3 months. "I know he's dead," I insisted, my voice gaining a desperate edge, but he was there, in his miner's clothes, carrying his pail, and his pickaxe was scraping along the rock, just no head. Paddy Flynn, who was lacing up his boots nearby, snorted. "Sounds like old Tom's finally cracked, eh? Been down there too long, Big Tom? Seeing things in the dark?" "It was no trick of the light, Paddy," I snapped, turning to him. "My lamp died. Absolute darkness. Then I lit it, and he was there, walking." Daniel Schreiber, Jacob's brother, was sitting on a bench, meticulously cleaning his own lamp. He hadn't said a word, but his eyes, when they met mine, held a deep, ancient sadness. He didn't scoff like Paddy. He just looked at me, a silent understanding in his gaze, before returning to his work. Silas clapped me on the shoulder, a heavy, dismissive gesture. "Get some air, Tom. Go home. Sleep it off. It's the mine, gets to everyone eventually, makes you see things. We'll send a man to check your charges, and for God's sake, check your carbide before you go down again." He moved away, already turning his attention to other men, other tasks. His world was one of rock and iron, not headless specters. Paddy just shook his head, a smirk on his face, before heading down the shaft with the rest of the morning crew, his lamp casting its brave yellow light into the yawning black. I walked out of the colliery and into the gray morning light. The cold air doing nothing to clear the image burned into my mind. I knew what I had seen. It wasn't gas, it wasn't whiskey, and it wasn't mine fever. It was Jacob Schreiber, or something that looked exactly like him, walking a spectral shift in Tunnel 7, 3 months after his head had been crushed by the mountain. They didn't believe me. Not really. But the seed was planted. A subtle wrongness had been introduced into the familiar, brutal rhythm of our lives. The darkness had shown me something it had no right to hold, and I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that it wouldn't be the last time. The mountain kept its secrets, but sometimes it let them walk. They didn't believe me. Not really. But the seed was planted. A subtle wrongness had been introduced into the familiar, brutal rhythm of our lives. The darkness had shown me something it had no right to hold, and I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that it wouldn't be the last time. The mountain kept its secrets, but sometimes it let them walk. The days that followed were heavy, the air in the colliery already thick with coal dust, and the smell of damp earth seemed to grow heavier still. I went about my work, setting charges, clearing rock, but my eyes were always darting into the deeper shadows, my ears straining for that impossible scrape. I found myself checking my lamp more often, tapping the carbide chamber, watching the flame as if its steady light could ward off what I knew was there. The men, for their part, kept their distance from me. Some gave me wide berth, a look of pity mixed with unease in their eyes. Others, like Patty Flynn, continued with their taunts. "Still seeing ghosts, Big Tom?" he'd call out, his voice a little too loud, a little too forced. "Maybe you need a priest, not a pint." But even Patty's bravado had a new brittle edge to it. The shared laughter that usually followed his jests was thinner now, often dying before it reached the lamp house door. Then the whispers started. Not loud claims, not yet. Just quiet murmuring shared in the shadows of the shaft house, or over cold tea during breaks. Old man Hemmings, a timberman with more years in the mine than I cared to count, mentioned his lamp flickering out in Tunnel 5, just as a chill wind colder than any draft swept past him. He'd felt a presence, he said, a weight in the air that pressed down on him before his lamp snapped back on, leaving him alone in the silence. He didn't say what he thought it was, but the way his eyes darted to Tunnel 7 told its own story. Young Mikey O'Connell, barely 17 and new to the picks, swore he heard the distinct scrape, scrape, scrape of a pickaxe when he was alone, checking for loose rock near the entrance to Tunnel 7. He'd called out thinking it was old Daniel Schreiber, who often worked the quieter veins, but no one answered. The sound had just faded, leaving him with a racing heart and a cold sweat. He didn't mention a headless figure, not then, but the scrape was unmistakable. Each incident, small on its own, was a thread in a tightening noose. We were men of the earth, our lives governed by the tangible. Rock, coal, timber, sweat, and the constant threat of a cave-in or a gas pocket. We understood those dangers. We could fight them. But this was different. This was a threat that defied the very laws of our world, and it was slowly, inexorably making itself known. The sightings always followed the same pattern. Pre-dawn hours, always near the main shaft, heading towards Tunnel 7. Never a full, undeniable revelation, but always a terrifying glimpse, a sensory experience that chipped away at our rational minds, a sudden drop in temperature that left breath hanging in the air like fog, the unmistakable scrape in an empty tunnel. A lamp flickering, dying, then briefly illuminating a headless form at the edge of peripheral vision before plunging the miner back into darkness. It was as if the thing was testing us, easing us into its presence, showing us just enough to instill terror without giving us proof that Silas Blackwood could dismiss outright. Yannick Kowalski was one of the younger ones, barely out of his teens, with a hopeful light in his eyes that the mine hadn't yet managed to extinguish. He'd come from Poland, seeking a better life, sending most of his meager wages back to his young wife and infant daughter in the old country. He carried their photograph, folded and worn, in his breast pocket, a constant reminder of the world above and the future he was digging for. He often spoke of them, his voice soft, filled with a longing that made the older, harder men nod in quiet understanding. He was a good lad, diligent, earnest, and always ready with a shy smile. He was the kind of man you looked out for in the dark. One morning just before the first shift, Yannick was alone, checking a support beam near the main shaft, the kind of routine inspection that usually passed without incident. His lamp, he later swore, dimmed. Not out, not completely, but a weak, sickly glow, as if the carbide was suddenly watered down, the kind of dimness that makes shadows stretch and writhe. He knew his lamp was full, had just charged it himself. Then the sound came. Scrape, scrape, scrape. The rhythmic drag of that pickaxe, closer than it had any right to be, echoing in the sudden, unnatural silence. Yannick froze, pressed himself against the wet rock, eyes wide, seeing nothing but the dimness. He could feel the cold radiating from an unseen source, a chill that sank into his bones. Then a shadow, taller than a man, passed at the very edge of his vision. He didn't see the lack of a head, not clearly, just the shape, the purposeful stride, and the unwavering scrape, moving towards Tunnel 7. Yannick didn't run, not then. He just stood, barely breathing, until the sound faded, swallowed by the darkness. He came out of the mine that morning white as fresh blasted rock, unable to speak for an hour, his hands trembling so violently he couldn't hold his tea. His experience, recounted in halting, whispered tones, struck a deeper chord than mine. Yannick wasn't a man given to exaggeration or drink. His terror was raw, palpable, and he, like others, had described the scrape. Always the scrape. The threat, though still ambiguous, began to demonstrate a disturbing intelligence. Tools would go missing, only to reappear later in impossible locations, often near Tunnel 7. A rail car, left secured for the night, would be found slightly off its tracks in the morning, its brakes mysteriously disengaged. Carbide lamps, freshly filled, would sputter and die at random, only to reignite moments later without intervention. Small things easily dismissed as faulty equipment or human error, but accumulating, creating a growing sense of unease that permeated every shift. It was as if the mine itself was becoming hostile, actively working against us. Paddy Flynn, meanwhile, became more volatile. His skepticism, once a shield, was starting to crack. He'd snap at anyone who spoke of ghosts, his face red, his voice harsh. "It's the mine, you fools! The damp and the dark playing tricks on your minds. There's no headless man, just bad air and worse whiskey," he'd shout. But his eyes, when he thought no one was looking, would dart nervously towards the entrance of Tunnel 7, lingering there a moment too long. His bravado was fraying, becoming a desperate attempt to convince himself as much as anyone else. He was a man fighting against a truth he couldn't accept, and the strain was making him dangerous. Then came the morning the fear finally broke us. The shift was almost over. The lamps of the night crew were already making their way back towards the main shaft, their light a welcome sight. Yannick was working a new seam in Tunnel 7, a quiet, deep cut where the coal ran thick and black. He was due back with the last cart, but he didn't come. At first it was just a delay. "He's probably found a rich vein," someone joked, but the sound was forced. Minutes stretched into 10, then 20. Silas Blackwood, his face a grim mask, sent 2 men down to check. They returned, pale and silent, without him. A full search began, an unspoken dread hanging heavy in the air. Every lamp in the colliery was lit, every available man sent down. We moved through Tunnel 7, calling his name, our voices swallowed by the vast, oppressive dark. The rhythmic clang of picks was replaced by the frantic tapping of lamps against rock, a desperate signal in the gloom. I was with Silas, near the deepest part of the tunnel, where Yannick had been assigned. The air here was colder, damper, and the silence was absolute. No drip of water, no creak of timber, just the sound of our own ragged breathing. Then Silas stopped. His lamp beam, sweeping across the rough-hewn floor, settled on something small, ordinary, yet utterly out of place. It was Yannick's lunch pail, overturned. Its tin lid lay a few feet away, glinting. The apple he'd brought for his break was still in it, uneaten, a single bite taken from its red skin. But there was no sign of Yannick, no pick, no lamp, no man, just the overturned pail, a silent, stark testament to something violent and sudden. Silas knelt, picking up the pail, his calloused fingers tracing the worn metal. His face was a road map of deep lines, now etched even deeper with a grief that went beyond a foreman losing a miner. It was the face of a man who had just seen his world unravel. He wouldn't leave his pail, Silas said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble devoid of its usual authority. Not Yannick, not without his lunch. We found his lamp later, crushed beneath a pile of newly fallen rock further down the tunnel, near where the seam suddenly dropped away. But there had been no collapse reported, no warning rumble, just the silence and the empty space where a young man full of hope should have been. Yannick Kowalski was gone, vanished, swallowed by the darkness. His loss was a tangible blow, a raw wound in the already fraying morale of the colliery. It proved beyond any doubt that the threat was not merely a trick of the light or a figment of tired minds. It was real, it was lethal, and it had finally claimed one of its own. The whispers died, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. The headless miner was no longer just a ghost story. He was a killer, and he walked our tunnels. The whispers died, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. The headless miner was no longer just a ghost story. He was a killer, and he walked our tunnels. Fear, cold and sharp, gripped the colliery. It settled in the dust, clung to the timbers, and seeped into every man's bones. The camaraderie that held us together in the face of natural dangers began to fray under the weight of something unnatural. Men spoke in hushed tones, their eyes constantly darting towards the black mouth of Tunnel 7. Shifts became unbearable stretches of silent terror. Every creak, every drip of water, every distant rumble amplified into a potential harbinger of the headless man. No one wanted to be alone. No one dared. Foreman Silas Blackwood, a man who had always prided himself on his control, on his ability to command respect and order, found his authority crumbling. He tried to cling to the logical explanations, but Yannick's empty lamp hook and the overturned pail in the silence of Tunnel 7 were starker realities than any theory of gas pockets or rock falls. The men, their faces etched with a fear he couldn't dismiss, began to refuse to enter Tunnel 7, not even for the richest seams. They'd worked through cave-ins, through explosions, through the dreaded fire damp, but this was different. This was beyond their understanding and beyond their courage. Silas, with the mine owner's looming threats of lost contracts and idle machinery hanging over him, was forced to act. He called us one by one into his small, grimy office, the air thick with stale pipe smoke and the smell of fear. He made us swear affidavits, formal statements to be sent to the company detailing what we had seen, what we had heard. My own words felt flat on paper, inadequate to describe the terror of that first sight, the impossible emptiness above the collar. Others, like the men who had heard the scrape, who had seen the fleeting shadows, struggled to put their experiences into words. The clerk, a young man from the surface who had never set foot in the deep, looked at us with a mixture of pity and thinly veiled contempt, clearly believing us to be a superstitious, half-mad lot. He wrote it all down. The sightings, the sounds, the vanishing of Yannick. But the official reports we knew would twist it, blame bad air, exhaustion, anything but the truth that walked our tunnels. The mine owners, far removed in their carpeted offices, were desperate. Production was down, and the colliery was losing money. They didn't believe in ghosts, only ledgers and coal output. Their solution was simple, brutal, and entirely useless. They posted armed guards at the entrance to Tunnel 7. 2 men fresh from the surface stood there, rifles in hand, their faces pale under the flickering gaslights, trying to look imposing against the encroaching darkness. They were paid double wages, and they stood there, shifting their weight, trying to appear brave. It didn't last. The headless miner Jacob Schreiber didn't care for armed men or their flimsy assertions of control. He kept his schedule, his silent, purposeful walk from the main shaft to Tunnel 7. One night the guards, huddled together against the cold and the dark, heard the familiar scrape, scrape, scrape. Approaching. Their lamps, they later swore, sputtered, dimmed, then flared again just long enough to reveal him. A man in miner's clothes, his lunch pail in one hand, his pickaxe dragging lightly on the gravel, walking straight towards the hastily erected wooden barrier they had placed across the tunnel mouth. They shouted. They raised their rifles. One of them, a young man named O'Malley, fired a shot, the sound deafening in the enclosed space, echoing with a desperate futility. The bullet, they said, passed clean through him, hitting the rock behind. The headless figure didn't flinch. It didn't speed up, didn't slow down. It simply walked through the wooden barrier, the planks of timber passing through its form as if it were air, leaving them intact, undisturbed. Then it was gone, swallowed by the deeper darkness of Tunnel 7, the rhythmic scrape, fading into silence. The guards, white-faced and trembling, dropped their rifles and fled, never to return. The owner's armed solution had failed. The impossible had walked right through their barricade. Daniel Schreiber, Jakob's older brother, had watched it all unfold from a distance, a gaunt, quiet shadow in the lamp house. He rarely spoke, but when the guards stumbled back, babbling incoherently, he finally stepped forward, his eyes holding an ancient sadness. "I told you," he said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper barely audible over the panicking men. "He seeks something. He walks his last shift. The earth holds its grudges. Some debts are not paid with coal, but with blood." Silas, his face ashen, turned to Daniel. "What are you saying, Daniel? What does he want?" Daniel shook his head slowly. Jacob was a good man, but the mine, it takes. And sometimes what it takes, it doesn't give back easily. His spirit is bound here. He needs to finish his work, or perhaps to take what he lost. His words hung in the air, heavy with a terrible understanding. The other miners, who had once dismissed Daniel's old-world superstitions, now listened, their faces rapt, searching for any scrap of meaning in the madness. Silas, too, for all his pragmatism, found himself clinging to Daniel's cryptic warnings, a desperate man grasping at any explanation, however supernatural. But even with Daniel's somber wisdom, the true terror had yet to fully reveal itself. That came for Paddy Flynn. Paddy, the staunch skeptic, the boisterous Irishman who had scoffed at every whisper, whose bravado had been his shield, had finally reached his breaking point. Yannick's disappearance had shaken him, but he'd tried to rationalize it away, muttering about stray gas pockets and hidden fissures. He'd still worked in Tunnel 7, trying to prove his courage, trying to prove us all wrong. He'd become more agitated, prone to sudden outbursts, his temper short, his eyes haunted. He drank more, his laugh becoming brittle, his jokes falling flat. His skepticism had curdled into a raw, unfiltered terror that made him increasingly volatile. It happened during the afternoon shift, deep in Tunnel 7. Paddy was working a small, isolated pocket, a narrow cut only wide enough for one man. I was further back shoring up a timber, the rhythmic clang of my hammer echoing hollowly. The usual mine sounds were all present, the drip, the distant rumble, the creak. Then I heard a different sound, a sudden, sharp gasp, then a strangled cry from Paddy's direction. My lamp beam cut through the dust-laden air as I scrambled towards him. "Paddy, what is it?" Silence. A profound, unnatural silence. Even the drip of water seemed to cease. Then a low, guttural moan filled with pure, unadulterated terror. I reached the opening of Paddy's cut. My lamp cast a frantic, dancing light, illuminating the narrow passage, and there he was, Paddy Flynn pressed against the wet rock wall, his pickaxe fallen from his hands, his carbide lamp still on his helmet, but its beam erratic, flickering wildly. His face, usually ruddy with temper, was chalk white, his eyes wide and vacant, staring into the darkness at the end of his tunnel. His mouth was open, but no sound came out, only that ragged, choked breathing. "Patty, what do you see?" I asked, my own voice a strained whisper, dread coiling in my gut. He didn't answer. He couldn't. His body trembled violently, his gaze fixed on something I couldn't yet see, something at the very edge of my lamp's reach. Then, with a sound like a whimpering dog, he suddenly stumbled backward, away from whatever horror held him captive. His lamp, jarred by his frantic movement, flew from his helmet, hitting the rock floor with a sickening crack and plunging the narrow passage into absolute suffocating darkness. I heard his panicked scramble, the frantic scratching of his boots against the rock, trying to escape. "Patty, wait!" I shouted, but my voice was lost in the sudden, overwhelming blackness. He was moving backwards blindly, further into the tunnel's depths, away from what he'd seen. Then came the sound. Not the scrape, not the normal sounds of the mine. This was the sound of splintering timber, of groaning earth, of rock giving way, a horrifying wet crunch that echoed through the pitch black, followed by a choked final cry. My heart hammered against my ribs. I fumbled for my striker, my hands shaking so violently I almost dropped it. When my lamp finally caught, sputtering into a weak yellow glow, it illuminated an empty space. Patty was gone. The section of rock where he had been standing, where the sound had come from, had collapsed. A fresh pile of rubble, jagged and wet, now sealed the passage. There had been no tremor, no warning. Just the terror in Patty's eyes, the sudden darkness, and the sound of crushing rock. It was a precise, targeted collapse, an act. I stood there, lamp beam trembling, staring at the fresh rubble, the silence now deafening. Patty Flynn, the man who laughed at ghosts, who scoffed at fear, had been taken, not by a natural disaster, but by the headless miner. He had seen it, undeniably finally. And in his desperate flight, he had fallen into its trap, witnessed, taken, leaving no doubt about the true, horrifying nature of our foe. I found Silas Blackwood a few minutes later, already making his way towards me, drawn by Patty's scream and the sound of the collapse. His face, when he saw the rubble, when he saw my own terror-stricken expression, was a roadmap of despair. He was running, I managed, my voice hoarse. He saw him, Silas, the headless man. He was running. Silas didn't scoff. He didn't try to rationalize. He just nodded slowly, his shoulders stooped even further, his eyes fixed on the pile of rock that had been Patty's grave. The death of the skeptic had confirmed it all. This was not a random haunting. This was an intelligent, implacable entity harvesting us one by one. It was a fight for survival, and we were losing. From that day forward, work in Tunnel 7 ceased entirely. No amount of threats from the owners, no promise of increased wages, could convince a single man to set foot in its cursed depths. It became a tomb, not just for the coal, but for our understanding of what was real. We sealed it off with a makeshift barrier, a futile gesture, knowing it wouldn't stop what walked inside. The mountain kept its secrets, and in the black heart of the colliery, a cold, empty silence settled, punctuated only by the drip of water and the chilling, ever-present echo of the scrape. We sealed it off with a makeshift barrier, a futile gesture, knowing it wouldn't stop what walked inside. The mountain kept its secrets, and in the black heart of the colliery, a cold, empty silence settled, punctuated only by the drip of water and the chilling, ever-present echo of the scrape. But that silence wasn't enough. The mine owners, far removed from the cold rock and the stench of fear, saw only lost production. They didn't care for ghosts, only for coal. Weeks passed and the whispers grew into a roar. No man would enter Tunnel 7, not even for double wages. The whole colliery felt infected, a malaise spreading from the cursed section. Men started to quit, packing their meager belongings, their eyes holding the same haunted look I saw in my own reflection. Production plummeted. The very air above ground seemed heavier, burdened by the unspoken dread below. Foreman Silas Blackwood, his face now permanently etched with defeat, fought a losing battle. He argued with the company men, trying to explain the unexplainable, but their ledgers only showed red. They called it miners' superstition, mass hysteria. They sent in their own inspectors, men with soft hands and clean suits, who walked through the quieter, safer sections of the mine, sniffed the air, and declared it fit for work. They never went near Tunnel 7. They never heard the scrape. Finally, a decision came down from the main office, cold and final as a winter wind. Tunnel 7 was to be permanently sealed, not just a makeshift barrier, but a concrete sarcophagus, a solid, unyielding wall of rock and cement, poured deep into the earth, severing the cursed vein from the rest of the colliery. It was an admission of defeat, a surrender to the impossible, but it was also a desperate hope for containment, a chance to stop the bleeding, to save what remained of the mine and the men. A skeleton crew was assembled. No one volunteered. We were chosen. Silas, of course, as foreman, his duty binding him. Daniel Schreiber, quiet as ever, insisted on coming. He said he needed to ensure his brother's spirit was finally put to rest, or at least contained. And I, Big Tom McKenna, the first to see it, the one who carried the knowledge, I was on that list too. My hands, usually steady, trembled as I packed my powder. We were going back into its domain. The day we went in to seal Tunnel 7 was as gray and bleak as any November morning. A thin, cold rain fell, turning the slag heaps into black, glistening mountains. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and the heavy, metallic tang of fear. We didn't speak much as we descended, the cage rattling down into the earth's maw. Each man carried a lamp, its yellow light a fragile shield against the encroaching darkness. The deeper we went, the colder it became, a bone-deep chill that had nothing to do with the outside air. When we reached the entrance to Tunnel 7, even the flickering light from our lamps seemed to recoil. The makeshift wooden barrier stood there, a pathetic gesture now. Splinters visible where the headless figure had simply walked through. The silence inside was profound, a hungry, waiting silence that swallowed the drip of water from the roof and the nervous shuffle of our boots. The air was heavy still, as if holding its breath. Our task was to construct a robust wooden framework, then fill it with rock and cement, creating a solid plug. We had brought down sacks of quicklime sand and barrels of water, along with picks, shovels, and the heavy timbers for the frame. It was a race against time, a desperate effort to build a prison before the prisoner decided to make an appearance. Silas moved with a grim determination, his voice low but firm, giving orders. Daniel worked methodically, his old hands surprisingly strong as he helped position the heavy timbers. I began mixing the cement, the grit under my boots, the smell of damp lime filling my nostrils. Every shadow seemed to stretch and writhe. Every distant creak of the mountain felt like a warning. Our lamps, usually comforting, now seemed to draw attention, painting us as targets in the overwhelming black. We worked for what felt like an eternity. The rhythmic scrape of shovels and the thud of timbers against rock, the only sounds for a long time. The fear was a constant, icy companion, but the urgency of the task kept us moving. We built the frame strong and deep, designed to hold back more than just earth. We shoveled in the rock, then began mixing and pouring the cement, a thick gray slurry that swallowed the light and oozed into every crack. As the wall began to rise slowly, inexorably, the atmosphere changed. The cold intensified, a deep, pervasive chill that seeped into our bones. The silence grew heavier, more oppressive. It was as if the very air was watching us, waiting. The subtle wrongness, which had been a seed of dread, was now a fully grown poisonous tree, its roots deep in our hearts. Then it happened. Not a sound, not a visual, but a feeling. A sudden crushing weight in the air, a sense of an immense silent presence. Every man froze. Lamps held high, their beams frantic, searching. The tunnel stretched before us, empty, but it wasn't empty. We could feel it. It was among us. I heard a gasp from one of the younger men, a new recruit who'd been pressed into service. His lamp beam, which had been shining steadily on the rising concrete wall, suddenly flickered. Then, with a soft pop, it died. The light was gone, replaced by absolute impenetrable black. Before any of us could react, before any man could find his striker, the same thing happened to every lamp in the tunnel. One by one, with those same soft, impossible pops, they winked out. All of them. My own lamp, secured to my helmet, went last, plunging me into a darkness so profound, so absolute, it felt like a physical blow. A darkness that swallowed sound, swallowed breath, swallowed sanity. The claustrophobia was instant, overwhelming. I was blind. We all were. Panic erupted. Men cried out short, sharp shouts of terror. I heard the scuffle of boots, the clang of a shovel hitting rock. The heavy, ragged breathing of men suddenly rendered helpless. The air grew thick, suffocating. My heart hammered against my ribs, a desperate drum in the void. Then, through the chaos, through the terrified gasps and desperate fumbling, came the sound. It was faint at first, a low rumble deep in the earth. Then it grew, echoing through the pitch-black tunnel, bouncing off the unseen rock walls, growing louder, more immediate. The unmistakable sound of crushing rock. Not a cave-in, not the rumble of distant carts. This was the specific, horrifying sound of heavy stone collapsing, splintering, grinding, the very sound that had accompanied Jakob Schreiber's death, the sound that had preceded Paddy Flynn's final choked cry. It was the sound of its vengeance. It was all around us, coming from everywhere and nowhere, amplified by the darkness, a symphony of death. It felt like the entire mountain was collapsing deliberately, maliciously on us. I heard Silas Blackwood's voice, a raw, strangled sound, cut short by a sudden, violent cough. He was close, too close. I knew in that instant, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that it was here. It wasn't just extinguishing lamps. It was actively attacking, recreating the moment of its own demise, forcing us to experience its last, crushing seconds. My hand instinctively reached out, blindly searching. I felt Silas's arm, then his shoulder. He was struggling, gasping for air. The sound of crushing rock intensified, closer now, deafening. I felt tremors in the ground beneath my feet. This wasn't just a sound, it was real. The ceiling was groaning. "Silas!" I yelled, my voice thin against the roar. "Oh my, we have to go, now!" He didn't answer, just coughed again, a wet, rattling sound. He was disoriented, trapped in the darkness and the crushing sound. I grabbed his arm, pulling him. He resisted for a second, then stumbled forward, following my lead. I remembered the path, the way out, a desperate, ingrained map in my mind. Every step was a gamble, every breath a prayer. We stumbled over unseen obstacles, my boots slipping on wet rock. The crushing sound was directly behind us now, gaining. I could feel the vibrations through the soles of my feet, taste the dust in the air. I pushed Silas forward, pushing myself. The image of Yannick's empty hook, of Paddy's terrified eyes, driving me. We couldn't be next. We couldn't. We reached the main shaft, the faint light from the lamp house above a beacon of salvation, a pale, distant star. We scrambled into the cage, pulling the lever, our hands raw, our lungs burning. The cage groaned, then ascended, slowly, agonizingly, slowly. I looked back into the black maw of Tunnel 7, expecting to see it, to feel it reaching out from the darkness. But there was nothing, only the lingering, fading echo of crushing rock. We made it out, traumatized, shaking, but alive. The others from the skeleton crew were not so lucky. 3 men were found, buried under fresh rock falls in the absolute blackness of Tunnel 7. 2 more were never recovered, swallowed by the darkness, their names added to the growing list of the mine's victims. Daniel Schreiber was among those lost, his quiet wisdom silenced forever within the mountain's depths, perhaps finally finding peace with his brother. I had left my best pickaxe behind in my scramble to get Silas out. A small price, I told myself, for a life, but I never forgot it. The sealing of Tunnel 7 continued, but faster now, with more desperate urgency. The concrete poured, thick and gray, a final desperate act of containment. We worked through the night, our faces grim, our silence a testament to the horrors we had witnessed. The raw, gray scar of the concrete wall grew, slowly consuming the entrance to the tunnel, a tomb for an incomprehensible evil. When the last of the concrete was poured, when the wall stood solid and impenetrable, a finality settled over the colliery. The mine owners, in their official reports, minimized the events. They blamed gas leaks, structural failures, unforeseen ground instability. There was no mention of headless men, of extinguished lamps, of purposeful collapses. The deaths of Yannick Kowalski, Patrick Flynn, Daniel Schreiber, and the other miners were attributed to the inherent dangers of the profession. Just another grim tally in the ledger of coal. But we knew the truth. We, the men who survived, who had seen it with our own eyes, felt it with our own souls, we knew. The cost was clear. Shattered lives, men broken beyond repair, a section of the mine forever cursed, and a terror so profound it altered the very fabric of our understanding. I never went back into the mines after that. The memory of the absolute darkness, the sound of crushing rock, the feeling of that silent, implacable presence, it was a brand on my soul. I left Centralia, left the coal dust, left the endless struggle with the earth, but the earth, it seems, never truly leaves you. Years have passed since that terrible winter of 1892. The colliery still operates, though production never fully recovered. The concrete seal on Tunnel 7 stands firm, a gray monument to a forgotten horror. Most men have forgotten the specifics or never knew them, dismissing the old tales as miners' lore, ghost stories to tell around a fire. But on quiet nights, when the wind sighs through the slag heaps and the moon hangs cold and distant over the scarred landscape, I can still hear it. A faint, rhythmic sound, deep beneath the mountain, a chilling echo from a time when men learned that some tunnels lead not to coal, but to what lies beyond death, a soft, unwavering scrape.